This is TWiT.
Prop 22, we had a proposition in California that said that was basically funded by Uber and Lyft, and it was approved by a majority of California's voters that classified drivers and couriers as independent contractors and said it's okay, even though in state law it probably was not okay because of the threat of that. Uber and Lyft put this proposition forward. It's fairly easy in California. It doesn't take very many signatures to get a proposition out there, and then bought millions and millions of dollars in ads. Fooled me. I'll be honest. I voted yes on Prop 22. They had a lot of nice moms saying, I want to be there when my kid gets home from school. I need a way to make money. I want to be able to make my own schedule. It's great. I drive for Lyft, and it's a great thing. And I actually bought it. A judge has ruled now that it is unconstitutional. In federal court on Friday, Alameda County Superior Court Judge Frank Roche said it's unenforceable because a section in the measure limits the ability of legislatures to amend the law. Boy, that tells you how smart Uber and Lyft were. When they wrote it, they said, oh, and by the way, the legislature can't override this. And that's unconstitutional. It's lucky that I guess that they did that. I still am not sure how I would vote if that proposition went up again, because there's plenty. I mean, if you look, there's plenty of gig workers who say no. We appreciate the ability to work on our own schedule.
They do, and I mean, I've been covering this for Bloomberg for a number of years now, and spoken to a lot of Ubers. I actually spent hundreds of pounds at one point taking rides in Ubers to specifically say, "Hey, I'm a journalist. Can I talk to you about this thing?" And they all wanted to talk about it. And in the UK, I mean, Uber's is a very interesting case in Britain because earlier this year, Uber did reclassify its drivers as workers, and there's like 70,000 of them were at
that
the
means they at least in the US they'd have to pay benefits. They'd have certain rules about employment.
That's right.
Worker protections.
Yeah, but it's not the same as classing them as an employee. So there is it's kind of quite a specific definition, I think, under British law. But a lot of people looked at it and said, look, this is the way it's going to go. And if you look across Europe, there are consultations at various stages of progress where countries are saying, look, you've got to offer protection to these guys.
It's interesting because in the UK and Europe, you have nationalized health. So one thing that is not at risk for these workers is health care. In the United States, that might even be the biggest issue for these workers because they, of course, don't get health care when they're contractors.
In the UK, certainly, yeah.
So that's real. I think that's interesting. It's still an issue in the UK, even though health care is not on the table.
But healthcare, there are gradients of healthcare. I mean, yes, we have free healthcare. Anyone here gets, doctors and medicines. It's taken care of. It's free if you need it, or heavily subsidized. But that doesn't necessarily entitle you to extremely quick being seen very quickly, or if you have an emergency, obviously that's different. But if you've just got something that kind of needs doing, you still end up on a waiting list. You're not going to pay for it, but you're still on a waiting list. Whereas private healthcare, usually, you're seen very, very quickly. And a lot of companies do offer that sort of perk.
So that would be a benefit of employment is better healthcare.
Yeah. And things like holiday, vacation time as well. The way that Uber did it, I think, is that you get a certain number of hours paid to you in lieu of having the days that you can take off because you're working your own hours. So it's more like, well, we'll give you a percentage. Like over the course of a year, if you're working full time, you may have had this many days paid vacation. So we'll take that as a percentage and just apply that as sort of like a cash bonus on top of whatever hours you do. So it's not like you're getting the days as paid holiday. It's more like you're getting the money that you would have had based on how much you're driving, if that makes sense. It is really complicated, and it's quite specific to Britain at the moment.
I'm very conflicted about this because on the one hand, I think it's a modern way of employment, gig employment, and people don't have to choose it. That's, I guess, the fundamental crux of it. Do people choose it because they have to? There's no other option out there, just like Amazon warehouse workers have to take a bad job because there's no other option? Or is it a fairly fluid labor market? Could they take a better job, in which case they're choosing this gig work, maybe for good reason?
Well, let's go back to that ad you cited where you talk about how in the ad there was the mom who said, I wanted to be there for my kids every day. One of the appeals of any sort of gig economy hustle is the idea that you do have control over your time so that you can, especially if you're somebody who is responsible for caregiving either a parent or a child, so that you can balance the demands of your personal life against the very real need to make money. I suppose you could argue that they took the job because they had to, since being able to control when and how much you work is going to be a huge priority to people.
Right.
The
modern
flip
world
side
is
of that,
tough.
of course, is the flip side. The flip side is that it's sold as this: oh, you have total control over your time, but that's almost like, oh, the good news is it's a flexible schedule. Yeah, go ahead and work any 80 hours a week you want to work.
Yeah.
Because you just like you mentioned with your son who's on TikTok, I don't think it's a coincidence that we're seeing a rise in the number of articles talking about TikTok influencer burnout, where these kids were like, I just have to keep exactly.
Yeah.
And with these.
But it's his choice to do it.
Well, with these gig economy type jobs, it's the same thing where the risk of burnout is real. And one of the hazards of being an independent contractor is if you don't have any sort of built-in benefits, you can't take a 2-week paid vacation and you can't take a sick day. And you may not have a boss who's forcing you to go to a webinar to tell you how not to get burnt out.
In the old days, before whatever happened to our politics happened, this was the kind of thing that would divide Republicans and Democrats. Democrats would say, no, you got to protect workers. Republicans would say, no, it's their choice. It's free choice. If you don't like it, get another job. And I think that is a debate that is not an unreasonable debate. I don't know where I come down on that. I understand both sides of the issue. Uber and Lyft, by the way, say that this is outrageous. And they will appeal the judge's decision.
One of the things that I just wanted to mention on the OnlyFans front, because I forgot to mention it earlier, is that the pandemic has made that platform, and specifically that platform, very popular for a large number of people who were suddenly out of work or had a lot of spare time on their hands and have made good money during the pandemic as a result of basically being stuck at home but having an outlet for something they can do at home. And I wonder how many of those people during the period of time that they have now been at home, because let's be honest, this has gone on for an awful lot longer than anyone has thought it probably would.
And looks like it's going to go on even longer, by the way.
How many of them had got to the point where maybe they started doing something and thought, maybe this can support me, maybe it'll just be for a couple of months. But over the course of the prolonged period of the pandemic, they've actually said, you know what, I don't need to go back to work. Like, I don't need furlough. Like, let's just go all in on this. This'll keep me. And then this happened.
Right.
And now they're out of money, potentially, and they're out of work as well. I don't know. I just think there will be quite a few people that will fall into that category.
It's complicated, right? It's hard to know where to come down on this. And you've studied it a lot more than I have. You have direct contact with drivers. I mean, I have anecdotal contact with drivers. And, of course, you can't really trust somebody who's doing it because they have some investment in justifying the fact that they're doing it, even if it's a terrible, gig for them. They might be more inclined to say it's good just to justify the fact that they are doing it. I don't know. A DoorDash's minimum guarantee is $16 an hour plus 30 cents a mile. That sounds pretty good. That doesn't sound like a bad gig. I just don't know.
I would ask, with the DoorDash gig, what happens if a customer's dissatisfied? Or are you required to eat the cost of a meal if a customer's like, this isn't what I ordered? Or it seems like it's one thing to say you're making $16 an hour. I would question what sort of protections are there for dealing with just difficult customers?
We have a local food delivery service called the Petaluma Food Taxi that recently has had to ask people, do not withdraw your tip after you get your food. So apparently what people are doing is saying, I'm going to give you a 30% tip, and then after they get the food, they cancel the tip as a way to get and send a good delivery, but then they don't, the driver gets nothing. And I thought, that's so low, but of course people are going to do stuff like that. Yeah. But if you work with the public, you know, in any capacity, you have to deal with that. I don't care if you're working at Starbucks or an Uber driver.